When you hear people talk about the 07 Cavaliers making it to the NBA Finals, you'll often hear it described like this.
Paint cans, squeegees, and a nail file. That's what he took to the finals.
But I'm here to tell you that that's not exactly true. That Cavs team that played with LeBron James were not as bad as people say they were. And after watching this video, maybe you'll agree. Let's reflect. Starting with an overview, that Cavs team won 50 games in the regular season and were one of the best defensive teams in the NBA, ranked 4th in defensive rating and 5th in points allowed. And in the playoffs, they took it up to a whole nother level by leading the NBA in points allowed by allowing only 86.7 points per game and coming in 2nd in defensive rating, right behind the New Jersey Nets. Now, to be fair, LeBron James contributed greatly on the defensive end that season, playing both great man and help defense. But the defensive philosophy of the team can be credited to one man, Mike Brown, a Greg Popovich disciple, who emphasized defense as the Cavs' second-year head coach. And that team was full of players who made an impact on the defensive end. That Cavaliers team also ranked 4th in offensive rebounds and 6th in defensive rebounds. Tallied together, they ranked 2nd in rebounds overall for the regular season and 5th overall in the postseason. So they were a fundamentally sound defensive team and were a strong rebounding team as well. Now offensively, that's where they lacked, as they had the 18th ranked offensive rating in the regular season and scored only 96.8 points per game on average, which was just behind the Charlotte Bobcats, who averaged 96.9. To put it in perspective, there was a 3-point difference between them and the 10th ranked Milwaukee Bucks, who averaged 99.7 points per game, and a 2-point difference between them and the eventual champions, the San Antonio Spurs, who ranked 13th overall with a 98.5 point per game average. Now, while that's a reasonable gap, the Cavaliers defense was still able to nullify most teams, because they did something better than almost everyone else in the league, and that was control the pace of the game. And yeah, it's something that LeBron James is famous for now, but even back then it was an absolute hallmark of that Cavs team, as the Cavaliers ranked 22nd in pace in the regular season at 91.59, which wasn't much faster than the Spurs, who clocked in at 28th with a pace of 90.22. But in the playoffs, this team grinded their game down to a halt with a pace of 86.62, which was a far slower pace than the up-tempo D'Antoni-led Phoenix Suns 94.77 pace or the San Antonio Spurs 89.7 pace. Now granted, most of the up-tempo teams did play in the West, but still, this was something that team seemed to pride itself on, slowing the games down and grinding it out to ensure that their opponents never got into a rhythm and so that the games never got out of hand, a tactic which worked for the most part, as they were able to navigate through the Eastern Conference led by LeBron James all the way to the conference finals, where they faced the Detroit Pistons, who no longer had Ben Wallace, who was an essential member of their championship teams, but instead replaced him with Chris Webber, a player who was coming off a 20-point per game average with the Philadelphia 76ers, but he had started to slow down and wasn't the same player as he was the year before. But still, the Pistons were a good team, a team good enough to win 53 games that season, and it took the Cavaliers 6 games to beat them. But in Game 6 of the series, LeBron James struggled, as he only shot 3 of 11 from the field for 27.3%, was 0 for 2 from the 3-point line, and 14 of 19 from the free throw line, which was 73.7%. Tallied together, he totaled 20 points for the game, though he did contribute 14 rebounds and 8 assists. But it was Boobie Gibson who was the hero of the game, as he scored 31 points off the bench, while shooting 7 of 9 from the field and going 5 of 5 from the 3-point line, also hitting 12 of his 15 free throws. But again, to LeBron's credit, after rewatching the playoffs, the LeBron James wasn't clutch narrative, or had to learn to be clutch narrative, has been a bit overblown as well. I gotta give him credit for this, because while it's really hard to define exactly what clutch is, I think in Game 5 of this series against the Pistons, where LeBron scored the Cavaliers' last 25 points, including a 3-pointer and 2 dunks in the 4th quarter that sent the game to overtime, where he scored the team's final 18 points, qualifies as clutch. But from there, we can move on to the finals, where everyone was certain that the Spurs would win, as they had 3 All-Stars in Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, and Tim Duncan, along with Robert Horry, whose finals and playoff heroics alone may attract Hall of Fame consideration, and Michael Finley, a 2-time All-Star who wasn't in his prime, but was still deadly from the 3-point line and a very capable scorer, up against the Cavaliers and their lone star player, LeBron James. And while it did turn out to be true that the Cavaliers got swept, that series was much closer than you've been led to believe, and it wasn't due solely to LeBron James, who only averaged 22.7 rebounds and 6 assists in the series. And for proof of that, let's start with Game 1, where the Spurs were heavy favorites coming into the game. But for the Cavs, their problem started with Larry Hughes, who had a tough time defending Tony Parker in the pick and roll and in ISO situations because he had suffered a foot injury in Game 3 of the Pistons series. But another problem was, and this was probably the biggest problem of them all, LeBron James had yet to develop a consistent jump shot, and the Spurs were practically daring him to shoot it in Game 1. Even with Bruce Bowen, who was considered the best perimeter defensive player at the time, someone who even Kobe Bryant had trouble with, he left the jump shot open for LeBron James all night. As for Tony Parker, it wasn't until LeBron James took up the responsibility of guarding him that Parker's offense slowed down, as LeBron could force him to become a jump shooter. But in Game 1, there were a few bright spots for the Cavs, one being Boobie Gibson, who hit a few clutch shots to keep the game close, along with Anderson Varejao, who was an excellent defender, who really doesn't get enough credit for how smart he was. For example, during the regular season, he led the NBA in charges taken per 48 minutes. Also, Drew Gooden had showed up to be a capable scorer on the Spurs and a solid defender, but the problems outweighed the good in Game 1, as LeBron James' turnovers really hurt the team. There were also a lot of wide open shots that LeBron James created for the team that just didn't fall as they did in the Pistons series, but he also missed a lot himself. In Game 1 of the series, LeBron didn't even score his first field goal until the third quarter of the game. But still, the Cavs saw the court better in the fourth quarter and almost mounted the comeback, which gave them a little hope heading into Game 2, where LeBron started the game off guarding Tony Parker, and LeBron established himself early offensively. But in Game 2, the first problem occurred for the Cavs when LeBron got into foul trouble early that forced LeBron to the bench. But even when LeBron came back on the court, the Spurs continued to extend their lead as the Cavs basically fell out of rhythm in the first half, and at halftime the game was 33-58 in favor of the Spurs. But the Cavaliers again made adjustments, and in the fourth quarter, head coach Mike Brown made a switch and surrounded LeBron with shooters Darnell Marshall, Boobie Gibson, and Damon Jones, with Anderson Varejao defending Tim Duncan. And with them playing elite defense on the Spurs, they were able to cut the Spurs lead down to 10. And with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, the Cavaliers were on a 21-4 point run. Even when Tony Parker made a spectacular well-contested shot, the Cavaliers came right back down the court and did the same. LeBron also started to consistently hit his free throws, and the Spurs lead was cut down to 8 with 4 minutes and 48 seconds left. But at the 2-minute 48-second mark, that's when Manu Ginobili hit a 4-point play to close the door on the Cavaliers. But the Cavaliers' takeaway from Game 2 was that they were never truly out of the game, and if LeBron cut down on his turnovers, as he committed 12 of them in the first 2 games, and stayed out of foul trouble, the Cavaliers could still win a game. Then we entered Game 3, where after the coaching staff heard a lot of criticism, Larry Hughes would sit out as he did for the remainder of the series. And in Game 3 at home, the Cavs started off hot, and Tim Duncan caught 2 fouls late in the first quarter, but in the second quarter with a 5-point lead and 6 minutes remaining on the clock, LeBron James himself had to sit down with 3 fouls, but Tim Duncan also with 3 fouls kept things relatively even, as the Spurs were only able to take a 2-point lead into the half. And the game was close the whole way through, as the Cavs played great defense on the Spurs, and were able to hold Manu Ginobili scoreless through the first 3 quarters. But LeBron continued to miss his open jump shots. But one thing we learned is that Bruce Bowen could not stop him in the post, something that LeBron James probably should have took upon himself to do more of. And in the fourth quarter, the Cavs were only down by 5 points, and even when LeBron turned the ball over, the defense recovered. LeBron cut a 10-point deficit down to 7, as Big Z continued to play strong defense on Tim Duncan. Drew Gooden excelled in rebounding, and Eric Snow's defense on Tony Parker helped keep the Cavs in the game. Then as the game continued, 2 clutch free throws by LeBron cut the game to 2 with 2 minutes left on the clock. But as Drew Gooden fouled out and Tim Duncan himself hit 2 clutch free throws, Tony Parker came back down and hit a clutch 3. But not to be outdone, Sasha Papovich came right back and hit a clutch 3 of his own to keep the game within reach. Then the Cavaliers defense had a clutch stop on the Spurs with 25 seconds left on the clock, and LeBron had a wide open 3 but passed on it as he looked to create a better shot. But in that moment, Anderson Varejao took it upon himself to take a very unadvised shot instead of passing the ball back, and crowd noise prevented Mike Brown from calling a timeout. And even with that, a missed free throw by Manu Ginobili kept the Cavaliers in the game, but a questionable missed foul call by Bruce Bowen on LeBron James at the 3-point line ended the game. So for Game 3, it was a very, very close game all the way through, as the Cavaliers held Manu Ginobili to only 3 points for the entire game, and the rotation of Eric Snow, Boobie Gibson, and LeBron James' defense on Tony Parker kept him relatively neutralized. But it was a poorly advised shot by Anderson Varejao and a missed foul call at the end of the game that kept the Cavaliers from winning or at least sending it to overtime. Then Game 4 happened, and in this game the Cavaliers again started off hot as LeBron hit his first mid-range shot of the series. Boobie Gibson hit an early three, and LeBron seemed to be in rhythm from mid-range. But in this game LeBron drew cold from the free throw line, but still the Cavaliers defense was able to force 5 turnovers in the first quarter, and LeBron had 0 himself in the first quarter, which was a positive sign. But then LeBron went out after getting hurt, and although he was only out briefly, he fell out of sync with his jump shot. But it was Tony Parker who set the world on fire by shooting 6 of 6 and having 15 points. But even with LeBron's jump shots not falling and his poor free throw shooting, Bruce Bowen still couldn't stop him in the post. But LeBron did not commit himself to the post game, and still at the half it was a 39-34 point game. Then jumping to the fourth quarter, the Cavs were down by 11 and the game seemed out of reach, but they were able to cut the lead down to 1 with great defense. Then with 8 minutes on the clock, the Cavs got the ball, and a drive from LeBron James gave the Cavs their first lead of the game. Then the Cavs were able to push it to a 3-point lead, and they shut the Spurs out for the first 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. But then the Spurs came alive as Manu Ginobili and Tim Duncan together scored 6 straight points to take a 1-point lead, and LeBron struggled from the free throw line. But the Cavs defense again was able to force a turnover, but a Manu Ginobili clutch 3 and a LeBron James missed wide open 3 led to the Spurs making a 12-3 point run. But later a clutch 3 from LeBron did cut their lead down to 5. Then LeBron had a costly turnover late with less than 1 minute left on the clock. But Damon Jones hit 3 free throws to make it a 3-point game, but 2 free throws hit by Manu Ginobili seemed to put the game out of reach. But with 7 seconds left on the clock, LeBron hit another 3-point shot, but Manu Ginobili was able to close the game out, and that's what led to the Cavaliers getting swept and losing the series. But if you go back and watch this series, I bet you'll see the same thing too. You'll see a team with a lot of heart and more talent than they're given credit for, as this team was very, very close in almost every matchup with the Spurs. And I truly believe that if Larry Hughes was healthy for the series, the Cavaliers could have taken at least 1 or 2 games, because the team's real downfall came from the fact that they didn't have their number 2 scoring option on the floor, or someone who could consistently defend Tony Parker. And while Larry Hughes may not have been a great scoring option, if he were healthy, he would have been very capable of defending Parker. But even without Larry Hughes, the defense this team played is highly underrated, and LeBron's inability to shoot really left something to be desired when the team needed to close out games. But the guys around him were still able to keep the games close, especially in the last 2 games. So next time you hear someone talk about 2007 Cavaliers, remember these names: Drew Gooden, Daniel Boobie Gibson, Sasha Pavlovich, Zydrunas Ilgauskas, Anderson Varejao, Damon Jones, Donnell Marshall, Eric Snow, Larry Hughes, Shannon Brown, Ira Newble, Scott Pollard. These aren't cadavers, corpses, or scrubs as people say. They were pretty good basketball players who played in the 2007 NBA Finals and lost in a very close matchup to an all-time great team, led by, but not carried by, LeBron James. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow, and I'll check you out later. Peace.